I think one of the biggest flaws with YouTube, without doubt, is the fact that once you've got past the initial flood of reviews and chat about a new camera or a new piece of equipment, there isn't really that much that gets shared in detail about how people are using those cameras, what they're finding works well, what type of shoots they're doing it on, and also some of the frustrations they might discover along the way. I think that's where you learn the most. That's where you'd really discover when a piece of equipment is something you should invest in, is after someone has really used it day in and day out in lots of different environments. And if a year later it's still in their camera bag, well, that's probably a good sign that it's a very reliable bit of equipment that they trust. So we're going to kick things off with a social media shoot that I did for one of my clients, and this is a very quick turnaround job, which is nice because I can actually talk about it. This was all shot on the Panasonic S1 Mark II, and it was actually the second professional shoot I had done with this camera. So this was really a good situation to see how well this could handle the real world. Now, it was quite a straightforward shoot and it was very nicely storyboarded by the client. It's all kind of close up and macros. So it's another good test of seeing how well this camera can handle. In terms of the gear that I used, we had the S1 Mark II, we had the new 24-60 lens, as well as the DZOFILM macro lens, which I absolutely love. That's a brilliant lens, and for stuff like this, it is the perfect lens of choice. That smooth focus ring and smooth aperture with a huge amount of range on the barrel as well just means that you can be really precise with your focusing, and that really helps when you're putting together a shoot like this. The tripod is my trusty iFootage tripod with the SMALLRIG head. I've talked about that many times on this channel. It's just my go-to. I am looking to upgrade it at some point, but for now it does the job absolutely fine. And when it came to lighting, I once again kept things quite simple, just the Zhun B200 light. This is a really portable but powerful light, and it just means there's no gear that I have to really worry about. It's just plugging straight in the back with the power cable and you're away to go. In terms of the modifier though, I was using the Aperture Light Dome 2, which is just easy to set up and packs down fairly small thanks to kind of its split design so that you can easily travel with it. And it just gives you a really nice big soft source that generally is more than enough for interview situations or doing macro shots like this. What I like about that, it's kind of become a bit of an industry standard, so everyone knows how to set one up and they've seen one before. So that's why I kind of prefer going with the Aperture for that particular reason over some of the other options that are out there. And all of this I could easily carry on my own. There was no parking anywhere nearby. There's no real public transport options nearby. I stayed in a hotel that did have parking about 15-20 minute walk away. So I just carried all this with me using my trusty think tank bag for my main camera gear and the lighting and everything. And then I had my tripod and light dome over my shoulder. So let's talk a little bit about the shooting process for this particular shoot. As you can see, there was a real mix of angles, some top down as well as some side on close-ups that we were doing. And it's a really quite simple, short little social media shoot. The client did say they only want this for vertical, they only wanted it for a reel, they had no interest in doing different variations. So which is actually unusual for me because usually I'm asked to shoot absolutely everything all at once. So this was an opportunity just to do a vertical only setup. However, despite having that ability and having that option to do so, I actually chose to shoot normal. I chose to crop in on the image and take advantage of that open gate instead. And there's kind of two reasons for that and why I chose to do open gate over using a vertical setup. Now, don't get me wrong, I did do vertical for the top downs and there'll be a reason for that and I'll explain why. But for the side on shots, generally it was just easier to shoot on the tripod with the camera in a horizontal position. Simply that. It just made the controls easier. It's nicer to use the screen and a monitor on top. That setup is just so much nicer to use, and with the extra height that you have with open gate, I wasn't really concerned that I was massively cropping in on the image. I also knew that there was probably a chance that someday they would actually want the 16:9 version, so I think it was just worth shooting this way just to give us some options just in case. It also allowed us to move around the image in post a bit if we wish. So for example, like this image here, I think I did end up going with the center, yeah, but if I wanted to, I could have easily moved it left and right to really precisely choose exactly the shot that I wanted. And that's why actually with these higher resolution cameras, 6K and beyond, we should think a little bit more like a photographer and actually think about how we could crop it in post. Maybe not a huge amount, we're not talking about doing a massive zoom or anything like that, but just by giving you a little bit more leeway left and right and a little bit more height up and down, you can really sort of manipulate the image exactly how you wish in post, and it gives you far more options. Photographers have been doing this for years. They do it all the time without really thinking, and they sort of make it as part of their process of actually shooting. They'll shoot a little wider, giving themselves room to make those adjustments. That's the reason why I chose to shoot most of this in a normal horizontal position. However, when it did come to the top down, I did actually flip the camera into a vertical mode. Now, of course, it was top down, so it sort of wasn't vertical, if you get what I mean. But there's a big reason why I did this. Partly was sort of the framing. It just, with the lenses I had, it made more sense for the framing. But more importantly, what it allowed me to do is ensure that everything was perfectly vertical by giving me a bit of extra space to position the framing. So I still shot in a open gate format, even though I was already shooting vertically for the actual shot itself. So as you can see here, I can actually pan left and right a bit in the actual frame. And what this meant, I could ensure that everything was nice and straight. So I can rotate it easily, and I still have plenty of image to work with outside of my actual finished frame that I was going for. If I had just shot this and attempted to get it perfect in camera, there's a high chance I would have got it wrong. There's a high chance that I wouldn't have got everything absolutely perfect on the day, especially given the time constraints that we had and the fact it was only me actually shooting this. And it's easy to make little mistakes. It could be ever so slightly, but for a business like this, that it's all about precision, it's all about perfection, that's what they need to portray to their particular clients. Well, I need to ensure that I can get that in the film as well. If you're enjoying this video, please make sure you like and subscribe, and while you're down there, also leave a comment, as it's the only way I can tell if people are wanting more of this type of content. Now, in terms of actually using the camera and how I found it on this particular shoot, it was wonderful. I had no concerns of overheating. This was a normal office environment, probably about 21, 22 degrees. And we kept shooting for about 3 or 4 hours, never saw an overheating warning. In fact, I've been using this camera now for a couple of months and I've not seen the overheating warning once, and I've been in some really hot environments. So it'll be interesting to see when that does finally pop up, in what situation that I'll have that happen in. But for so far for me, the S1ii has been absolutely perfect when it comes to those scenarios. Autofocus wasn't a real concern because I was mostly using that S1ii lens and the macro, so I wanted to be pretty precise, and I was just manually setting focus. And of course with that really nice focus ring, I could ensure I could nail it exactly how I wish. And so when you're doing stuff like that, it doesn't really matter too much, because like here, I wanted to be on the logo. I ain't going to be using autofocus for a situation like that. For the top downs, I did use the other lens. I did switch then across to using the 24 to 60 lens, just so I had a slightly wider field of view. But even in that scenario, I stuck to using manual focus because I wanted to make sure, even when things moved around, that the focus stayed perfectly on the text in the middle of the screen. For a shoot like this, false color was absolutely critical, and it's such an important feature to have built into a camera. I know a lot of monitors have it, but I always find it a bit weird going through a monitor doing it, because you're never fully sure, is it basing it off the Rec. 709 image? Is it basing it off the log image it's going through? And I think just from in camera, you just trust that that's what the camera is seeing rather than what the monitor is interpreting. The reason why false color was so key for a shoot like this is ensuring there's consistency with the exposure as we do the shoot. Of course, there's multiple takes, so we wanted to make sure the exposure stayed the same each time. But also when we switched angles, you don't want a sudden big difference between the whites, for example, in this image and the color of her skin as compared to this angle. You're always going to get differences because the way light bounces, of course, it's going to look different from a side-on angle where the light is coming in from the left versus another angle where you're top-down and a lot of the light is coming from the top. There is always going to be those differences in color and contrast and the whites that you see. but having false color just ensured that there was a level of consistency throughout to make the color grading process much easier. Now, before we get on to the color grading process for this, I'll just mention the other thing that I found really useful with this camera was having that multi-angle screen, especially when we did the top down. Being able to just move and adjust the screen, not just in the normal way, but to flip it out at weird angles and it kind of be able to really adjust to how you wish, just makes doing something like this much easier. Of course, it wouldn't be a major problem using an external monitor or being able to flip the screen around with pretty much any camera out there, but having that extra degree of movement with the S1 Mark II screen does make life a lot easier, and it should be a standard feature on all cameras across all manufacturers moving forward. Now, when it comes to the color grading for this film, I kept it pretty simple. The base is just a phantom LUT. I've just stuck a phantom LUT on here. I think the base colors that they produce across all the cameras is really nice. Maybe you can call me a bit lazy there. Maybe I should create my own and sell them. That would probably be the smart YouTuber thing to do. But to be honest, I just like the phantom LUTs. They've got them for all the different cameras and they just help match up cameras between different brands really well. And I like the quality as a base point that they create. Now I have added just a bit extra contrast into here and tweaked the colors just below the LUT just to get my balancing all correct. And when it came to the hue and saturation curves, I've also massively reduced down sort of the pinks and a bit of the blues. The reason I did that is I've noticed that in the color on some of the shots that the whites were going really quite pinkish on my screen, and I wasn't a fan of that. I wanted to keep it a bit cleaner, so I just kind of pushed them down, but obviously conscious not to lose color in the person's skin or the pen. I've not really noticed any real concerns with shooting 420 over 422 when it's come to this. It performs as well as my Sony FX3 when I've done adjustments to colors, and I've been more than happy enough with the ability that I've been able to grade with. The dynamic range is very impressive with this camera as well. There's a huge amount there, and sometimes it can be overwhelming how much dynamic range we have on cameras nowadays, to the point where I think it's actually maybe making life a little bit harder, where you don't want to crush anything because you always can see everything in every shot. In the past, you just kind of accepted that's what you had and there was no more to work with. But these cameras are getting so good and it's quite insane how much detail you actually have. To finish off the color grade, I actually just applied a film look creator look over the entire video. Just a few small adjustments once again to contrast, highlights and fade, things like that. And main reason I did this really was to add the grain in. I do like the way the grain looks, particularly using the film look creator. Maybe not very obvious here on YouTube when looking, especially through a screen recording at the same time. But it just adds a little bit of nice sort of texture to the image that is extremely clean if you don't have it without. And that's what it looks like just with the phantom LUT and the sort of contrast adjustments that I've made and color adjustments. Obviously a lot flatter look going on here. So a lot of that contrast has been added back in using the film look creator. And I think it just gives you a nice particular strong look, which hopefully stands out on social media. So there you go, that was my use of a Panasonic S1 Mark II on a social media macro shoot. And overall, I was very impressed with the camera. It is a very useful camera for a shoot like this where you're working on your own. It's got everything you need right there and all the function and features that make life a little bit easier. Of course, I could have shot this on any other camera, but certainly having things like OpenGate does make life a little bit easier. It does give you a few more options when it comes to the post-production process, and it's those things that you can think about as you're shooting. I think moving forward, 6K is becoming a really important part of my workflow. Not because I want all that resolution, but just to think more like a photographer and actually frame up things where I know I can adjust it in post, giving myself just like a little bit extra around the outside of the image, both the top and bottom, but also the sides, just so that I can really manipulate the image in post and ensure that everything looks really nice without sacrificing too much resolution. I'd love to hear from you guys as well, if you've had any experience using this camera on shoots and if there's any issues you've come across, because I'll definitely test them out or keep an eye out for them when I am shooting myself on future shoots. And there'll be plenty more videos of these coming very soon, as well as talking about other gear that I'm using day in and day out on all of my shoots.